Amen. Listen, you may be seated in the house of the Lord. Listen, I'm excited for the things of God, and we're looking to do what God called us to do. We're establishing that today. I know it's Pentecost Sunday, and people walking around wanting to wear white and this, that, and the other, and trying to have all these doctrinal misunderstandings about what Pentecost Sunday is. But we're not there. Amen, somebody. Amen. We know, we people have misconstrued it and identified Pentecost Sunday as that fire raining down. But Pentecost simply is translated to be 50. That's it. It was established as to be the 50th day after Passover, when we had the Feast of Weeks, when they were beginning those celebrations. It just so happens that during that time in the New Acts, in the New Testament church experience, when Christ had been crucified and Christ had been in the process of resurrection, that as the disciples were awaiting him in the upper room, and they began praying during the Feast of Weeks, and the fire of God, the Spirit of God had fallen upon them, the Holy Spirit that invited the Comforter that Christ had spoken often of, come in and cause them to have tongues that were spoken of languages they didn't understand. But the people that was traveling to them, the people that was transitioning there for the Feast of Weeks, heard these tongues and these languages and understood what they were saying. And it was at that time where Peter was encouraged, and he began speaking what we consider to be the first sermon of the Christian church. See, people be confused. They say, well, Christ was preaching sermons, but Christ wasn't establishing a church. Christ was establishing an ideology, a theology, a doctrine, as we say. But it wasn't until Peter spoke that day and quoting scriptures that we begin to realize that what was happening during that time was its foundations and the establishment of what the Christian church was going to begin upon. It did come again. He said that I must go so that the Comforter may come. And it was during the time of the Comforter that the church began. And so here we are, over 2,000 years later, celebrating the Pentecost celebration and reminder of the time when the Holy Spirit had fallen, and this great fire of revival that has been going on for 2,000 years is still existing. But my mindset is that when I think about that, if this was such a great experience, which it was, then why has the church fallen so far away from the power of God and the Spirit that leads them? Why are we being compromised and using and following things such as musicians and gospel artists and reality TV, when the greatest reality television we ever experienced was Christ on the earth? But that's my thought, my digression, because again, I'm not here for political posturing. We're here to celebrate, as they say, Pentecost Sunday, the reminder of it. So I know people would expect that we're going to be speaking from the book of Acts, but we're not, because God gave me something different. Amen. On this Pentecost Sunday, something that I find to be of greater importance here, something that I find that the disciples ended up reoccurring in their lives when they were in the upper room. You see, in the upper room, they were there, and two things they were doing. One, they was waiting for Christ to give them instructions. And in the process of that, they were praying. People don't understand that the only reason that they were in the upper room at that time was because they had no idea where to go next. They had no idea what they were to do next. They had nothing left to do. They were in place, but they had no idea or concept as to what will happen on their next journey. So they found themselves waiting for something to happen in order for them to move into their next assignment. You understand? So what we see is when they found themselves at a place where they didn't know what next would be, next showed up. Mm-hmm. When they got to a place where they was pretty much emptied out and pretty much drained. Everything was given. They witnessed Christ dying on the cross. They didn't know what to do now because he was gone. They felt left alone and empty and by themselves. And in the midst of that, a fire rained upon them that caused them to go into a place of seeing that there was more they could do. And it sprung up out of them. It was that same fire that Jeremiah spoke of when he said, fire shot up in my bones. It's that same fire that we see from the beginning to even now. It was something that gave them the encouragement that there was more to life than where they were in life, and gave them direction to where next will go. So in your scriptures, I wanted to turn with me to the book of Matthew, chapter 14. I'm going to only deal with a few verses here, but I want to talk to you about something, and I'm actually in my subject matter as we speak. Matthew chapter 14, verse 17 says, and they said to him, we have here only 5 loaves and 2 fish. He said, Christ said, bring them here to me. Then he commanded the multitudes to sit down on the grass, and he took the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, and looking up to heaven, he blessed and broke and gave the loaves to the disciples, and the disciples gave to the multitudes. So they all ate and were filled, and they took up 12 baskets full of the fragments that remained. Now those that had eaten were about 5,000 men, besides women and children. So I'm coming to you from this. I want to correlate this because, again, this is Pentecost Sunday, where we celebrate the founding of the church. And again, Pentecost Sunday started way back in the Old Testament, but we're going to deal with Pentecost Sunday from the New Testament experience. And we see, again, as I shared with them in the upper room, and they had nothing. They were waiting for Christ to show up to give them instructions and directions, and the Holy Spirit has fallen upon them, and they start speaking. And here we see them looking at Christ, who told them to feed the people, and they say, all we have is 5 loaves and 2 fish, but he took it and fed 5,000. And what God said to me in the midst of this was, when you have nothing left. That's what he gave me for the title. If you wanted to need a title today, the title is When You Have Nothing Left.
Hallelujah.
I need you to understand.
Yes.
Pentecost occurred when you had nothing left, you see. And there's something happens when you have nothing left. I taught many years ago then that when nothing's happening, God is doing something.
Yes.
And once you understand that as an establishment of who you are, there should be no reason why you would walk around lacking any kind of faith. But because people didn't seem to embrace that as a mantra for their life, as a standard for their life, something that they could place, in a position of authority over their life, something that encouraged them, God is revisiting it on this Pentecost Sunday and saying, when you have nothing left.
Oh, Jesus. Hallelujah,
When you have nothing
My God. My God.
left, what do you do when you find yourself
Jesus.
in a place where you have nothing left?
Glory, glory.
What do you do when you find yourself in a position of, let me make it clear, believing that you have nothing left? But what do you do when you have convinced yourself that you have nothing left? In this passage we see Christ was just notified that John the Baptist is dead. Mm-hmm. If you read a few verses before this, it says that he went off on his own to be alone. We know that he did this in order to mourn and grieve for the loss of his cousin. We know that he had to allowed the humanity in him to embrace the loss of a life. And he didn't want to do this in front of people. He needed a moment alone. But if you read the next verse, it simply says that, but the people heard about this and they followed him. So they didn't hear about him losing his cousin. What they were following was him, because wherever he went, they knew miracles and signs and wonders would go. So he could not find a moment to be alone. So in the passage, we see that because he realized that there was such a multitude around him, it says, and he had compassion on them and said, we must feed them. The disciples in the humanistic and finite thinking said, well, we don't have enough food for them. Send them to the city to buy some food. But Christ said, feed them here. You have to understand. He said, feed them here. Here is a man who needed a minute and didn't even have, and wasn't allowed to have that minute. And he really had to learn or show us how to carry on when we had nothing to offer them. See, there was two things you had to realize he didn't have for them. He didn't have a word, and he didn't have any food. So he couldn't feed them in the two ways he normally were able to feed them. He didn't have enough provisions to provide a meal, and he didn't have enough words in his belly at that moment to feed them in their spiritual mindset, because he was dealing with the loss of his cousin. It was one of those times we said, I just need a minute. But you have to realize that when you feel that you don't have anything, that's when your greatest moments tend to show up. This was so significant to me because this is June, and I'm reminded of so many years ago when I find myself sitting in that emergency room, and there lays my wife gone to be with the Lord, but yet her father is walking down the hall, and I had to make a decision as to whether to be alone for that moment or try to pull out of what I didn't have in order to help him. So you got to learn how to realize that when you have nothing left, it's just a lie that you have convinced yourself exists. That when you have nothing else left, that's when God steps in. When you have nothing else left, that's when God moves. When you have nothing else left, that's when God makes a decision. We talked about the authority of words a few weeks ago. The fig tree was cursed not to produce anymore because the fig tree had already convinced Christ that it had nothing left. But how can you convince yourself or have the mindset that you had nothing left, and yet you have trees, you have leaves that are growing, which gives a sign that you are productive? Oh, y'all got to understand this. See, he had shown them that he could produce, but he didn't have what he said he could produce. So in one sense, he's saying, I'm being productive, but in the mindset, he was believing he had nothing left. So how can you show them leaves that says that you have something for them, but yet your mindset says, I don't have anything? But this is the mindset of the people of God. Because we walk around living that way all the time. We want to show people that we're making money when we broke is a joke. We want to show people that we're flossing and we're living with the bling bling. You go out there and you rent a Mercedes for the weekend just so you can show people that you got money. They will go and use anything of high value, but can't even afford the oil change on that. Simply because we want to give a perception of who we are instead of living the reality of what we are. But Christ is not doing that. Christ is standing here. Christ is saying, okay, I have to deal with the loss of my cousin. I got to deal with this death. And they're not giving him an opportunity to do that. So he says, okay, he switches, says, I got to feed them. I don't have anything for them, but I have to feed them. So he shows us a few things here. But one of the most important keys here is this, that even when he had nothing for the people in the sense of a message, he still had something for them. The people had come to him for so many reasons, but it was usually his messages, and he is seeking a moment to grieve the loss of John, but the people not even considering what he needed, followed him to a point that he could not no longer ignore the number. He could not no longer ignore the number. He had to put his grief aside and he had to consider them. Again, he shows us something, that even when tragedy is in your corner and you feel you have nothing left to give your nothing and God will make it into something. Yeah, let me say it again. Give your nothing and God will make it into something. And I can stop right there. I've preached enough because I'm trying to get you to realize that what you consider nothing is really not nothing. I don't want you to be confused about that. I don't want people to think I'm discrediting them or criticizing them or ridiculing them. I'm trying to get people free this morning to understand that every time you say that you have nothing left, that's not exactly true. There's still something there. And then what I mean is, like, if you say I have nothing left, and give that nothing to God. Uh-oh.
Yeah, I am.
See, we have people that point people in. And I need y'all to realize this, first of all, that we are never without nothing. We just believe that we have nothing. Y'all got to understand that we are never without nothing. We just believe that we have nothing. I've heard people all the time, they'll look in their cabinet and they'll see cans of food, but you look at them and say there's nothing to eat. But you walk past something.
Yeah.
Okay, let me
Come on
that
now.
right.
Yeah.
It's just not what you want to eat. Oh, but there's something there.
Yes, Lord.
You know, it is something there.
Yes.
I'm trying to help y'all because we do this oftentimes. We got that mindset. There's still something. You better make happy out of happiness. You better do something there. You better take two pieces of bread and put them together and make a wish sandwich. I wish I had something to put in between them because as long as I got bread, I still got something to put on my belly.
Yes.
Oh, y'all got to understand, because it's not as easy as people try to paint it to be. That's why, when they say there's nothing there to eat, no, it's something that there's nothing there that you want to eat.
Yes.
They see, my God. See,
Yeah. Teach us today, sir.
he says, I want you to realize that we are never without nothing. We just believe that we are. The verse says, and they said to him, we have here only 5 loaves and 2 fish. Some translation says we have nothing but 5 loaves and 2 fish. They said we don't have enough. All the verses, all the different translations that you may look at it, all of them are giving the same indication that they just don't have enough for who was there. But that didn't stop Jesus from instructing them to feed the people. And he did this out of correction, but out of instruction as well, because he knew that they needed to be hungry. He knew they were hungry. It was so many. And the disciples' solution was send them to the store. That's what he was telling them. Send them down to Sonic. Send them to Whataburger. Send them to Quickie Mart. Send them somewhere else. Send them all to McDonald's to get something to eat and tell them come back. That's what they do at conventions and conferences. When you don't know you don't have enough, you just try to send them away to get something else. But Jesus was looking at him and said, it doesn't make sense to send that many people away and then come back. Man, sometimes we got to get frustrated with the folks who say, what sense does it make to send 5,000 people into the city to get something to eat and then tell them come back? When you don't know what they traveled through to get here in the first place. But to the disciples, their solution was easier. But to Jesus, the solution was way more involved than that. So instead of sending away those that we are to serve, Jesus says, serve them. Mm-hmm. See, Jesus determined that we must serve them, period. So he hears the disciples say that all they have to feed the people is food enough for basically 2 people. They had 5 loaves and 2 fish. That's a couple of fish sandwiches at Long John Silver's. Couple of fish sandwiches at McDonald's, wherever you go. It's 1 sandwich if you get one from Checkers, a double fish. Y'all understand? But they say we don't have enough for all these people. And better yet, probably the one that said it was saying, you are about to take my lunch. See, he was probably said, I was smart enough to prep for my meal, for my journey. This was my lunch, so you're going to take my lunch. See, you don't find it amazing that when anybody would come and says what they'll do is they'll put some away for themselves because they don't believe there'll be anything left. Y'all. See. So we have to realize this, that our mindset is to think that we have nothing left, but in truth, we believe we don't have enough to provide for what the task is demanding. It's never been about the reality of having, because see, I don't know anyone, and I mean anyone. Don't get it twisted. I've met a lot of homeless people, and they say, I don't have anything, I have nothing, but yet I said, you got clothes on your back, and you actually have a place to sleep, even if it's on a street. So in that cart or that basket of yours, you have some things. So to tell me you have nothing, what you're saying is you don't have a house to live in, or you don't have a car to drive, or you don't have a job to go to. And I respect that. But to say you have absolutely nothing, you still have life. And God says we have life and life more abundantly. So as long as we still have life, we have something. So I don't want anybody to be upset about that. You can tweet it if you want. I could care less. But the thing about it is the disciples' mindset is the one that we all have at some point in time when we say, I don't have anything. And in reality, you have something. It's just that you don't want to give up what you have. So it's easier to say I have nothing because it's so definitive instead of just saying, well, all I have. Because, see, you know, if you say all I have, they be like, well, we'll share. But when you don't, because you're like, well, no, this is for me. But then you get scriptural and say, well, for me and my house. And they say, well, can I move in? Because if this is all you have, I mean, come on, I'm sitting here needing something. Because you know you got those people. I hear the commercial on the guy says, you going to eat that grape? He says, you mean the one in my mouth? It's like, because people will do that. They will try to take everything that you have just because they can without any care or concern. You ever been in that situation where, you know, you prepped enough just for you and you walk away and come back, it's gone? And the people that ate didn't even, you know, they like, oh, I thought it was on the stove. But it's like you didn't consider the fact that, A, you didn't prep it, B, you didn't buy it.
Say it again.
Let me switch that up. Let me be on the porch. A, you didn't buy it. B, you didn't prep it. So at what point did you think you had to cook? Uh-oh.
My Lord.
Because if the mindset is like, oh, I'm just going to walk in. Oh, there's food. Someone thought of me. Nobody thought of you because you didn't think enough to put something in the house to cook. So what happens is, I'm teaching my grandmother right now because she used to tell us that if you didn't buy it, don't touch it. But what happens is people have this mentality and this mindset to assume that what's yours is theirs.
Come on, Bishop.
And you have to sit there and embrace the fact that, wow, they just consumed what you worked hard to have. And here's the kicker. And my grandmother used to say it all the time. Here's the kicker. It always seems the one that actually has more that will take from you and never reciprocate. Uh-oh. They don't realize how much of the struggle it was for you to produce what you had. But they will consume it and never return it, not even a thank you, because they just assume if it's there, it's for everyone. And watch, as soon as you put your name on it, now you're being separatist. But what happens is because Christ was sitting here realizing that someone had something that they could make a miracle out of. So they said to him, well, all we have here, man, is 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish. That's barely nothing. Look at all these people. We don't have nothing. We don't have anything to feed them with. We have nothing to feed them with. Because they had already had in their mind that they just didn't have anything. They didn't even realize that the one that was talking to them could take a nothing and make something. All they realized was they had enough for 2. But they're looking at 5,000. So what do you do when you find yourself holding limited resources for an unexpected need? What do you do when you find yourself saying, I need this for something else and I can't give it up to them, so I don't reveal it to them because I'm holding on to it. You know, they used to, what they call it, stingy and cheap, but people call it frugal. And it's like, no. There's a time when God gives you the ability to produce in order for it to be given so it could reproduce. But because we hold on and watch this out of fear that if we get rid of it, we'll never get it back, you'll never see what it could produce because you're holding fast. Christ teaches about it in the parables, where the parables of the talents, where the one said, well, because I know you were this type of person, so I dug it, I dug a hole and I hid it there. And he said, and because of that, you will not be blessed. Mm-hmm. You know, we try to store up things because we don't, like hermit crabs, or it's because it's like we always feel we have this poor mentality that we got to hold on to every little crumb that exists. When the reality is, in order to get out of poverty, you have to take the crumbs and make a meal. Uh-oh. When people stop being so stingy with what they have and reaching a place where they can take what they have and produce more. It's amazing how many people will hold on to a lemon because they're afraid that that's the only lemon they'll get. And they'll hold on to it till the lemon can no longer produce because it becomes spoiled. Mm-hmm. Your 5 loaves and 2 fish has the ability to reach 5,000, but it never will because you're too busy holding it on to yourself. It'll never go further than where you expect it to because you're too busy holding it for yourself. Cheap people live cheap. And you can tell cheap people because they cheap in all they do. But cheap people don't have faith. Because if they did, they wouldn't be concerned about the little that they have. They would just know God will multiply it. Really? They become hoarders who keeps everything. And they will tell you that box under the 15th box in the corner on the 4th floor, where that one magazine on the 3rd level was taken by you, they will get upset. He's like, how did you know this? Because they'll never have, and they'll look at you with a house full of stuff and say, I don't have anything. I'm going to leave that alone. One thing I need you to realize is that you need to seek the unlimited resources that are standing before you instead of holding on to the limited resources thinking it's going to produce. No matter where you are, if you find your needs not being met, have faith that God can and will multiply the resources you already have. See, I could easily tell you here that it will happen supernaturally, but you first have to have something for God to multiply. See, this is where the problem is. People believing that God will make it, God will change it, God will fix it. But God is saying, what are you putting on the table for me to produce? By definition, multiply means to increase in number, especially greatly. But you have to have something to increase. Mm-hmm. Because if you multiply nothing, there's nothing. Uh-oh. Because if we're looking at the math, when you multiply 0, you still get 0. Because you can't reproduce something that doesn't exist. But nothing is not a 0. Nothing is still something. By definition, multiply also means to grow in amount or degree by reproducing. So no matter the definition, multiplying cannot occur if you have nothing to multiply. Mm-hmm. This doesn't negate the abilities of Jesus, but it does bring significance to the lesson he was teaching. Jesus could have caused the ocean to throw fish upon the shore for the 5,000 to eat. He could have even had animals come and sacrifice themselves for them, or things and plants to grow from the ground immediately for them to eat from. But instead, he took what they had and said, why don't you give me what you have, this little bit that you have for you and your boo, and let's take it and make 5,000 meals. Mm-hmm. Because if he had done anything else, these would have been, watch this, expected signs and wonders that the people would have wanted. And once they had seen these things, it would have signified, it would have caused him to be recognized as the Son of God, who he was just walking to be just God. I mean, just man. He was just walking to be man. But if he had done these things, they would have known he had these powers of God, and he was God himself, and it would have changed the whole premise of why he was there. He didn't want to convince them that he was the Son of Man. He wanted them to believe in their heart that he was. And that means that he could not prove to them who he was through what they would consider magic tricks. He had to just be himself and let them see the God come out of him. So the last thing he wanted to do, the last thing he could have done, was to sit there and create such a miracle in advance with absolutely nothing. Because then the people be like, oh, hey, Jesus. They'll see him weeks later. Hey, Jesus, I'm hungry. Can you hook me up? Y'all missed that. If they know that he could just speak into existence something to eat, then they would never work hard anymore. Why? Because we as people like things given to us. We don't want to work for it. We want people to just provide everything for us. We don't want to put our efforts into it. We want people to just hook us up. We'll go to our friends who have black businesses and go in there and knowing what the cost would be and say, hey, can you give me a discount? The discount is the fact that you walked in the door. You want me to give you a discount and then I hook you up every time you come in. I hook you up every time you come in. Then you bring people with you and they get hookups. And after a while, my business closed. And you sitting there saying, oh, man, you had bad business methods. No, I didn't. You just wanted a hookup every time you walked in. So we have to get to a place where we are living life authentically and walking out the life that God called us by knowing that even though we think we have nothing left, what we have, God can use. Jesus, much like the prophet Elisha, set a precedent here. Instead of man constantly looking for God to do everything for them, God wants man to bring something to the table that he can work with. As James writes, faith without works is dead. For the fact that James calls faith dead, if it not has works, is evident that by these works is meant not something that which meant added to faith, but something which grows out of faith. Let me say it again. Let me say it again. From the fact that James calls faith dead, if it has not works, it is evident by these works, it's not meant something which must be added to faith, but something which grows out of faith. He's telling us that in the midst of this, that our works will never add to our faith, that our works comes out of it. So if we did something in order to try to increase our faith or to prove that we are faithful, our faith is still dead. He's saying that our works must come out of faith. In other words, we must believe by faith that whatever we work will produce, instead of producing something in order to prove to people how faithful we are. Oh, y'all will catch that another day. Therefore, the disciples in Matthew could not grow in faith if they could not believe that their efforts with so little could provide for so many. Faith without works is dead. Their faith without works is this. Y'all go down there and get something to eat. But their living faith is, here, take what I have and eat. Knowing that you only had enough for the first two. But you said eat. Even though the people in 3 through 499, 3 through 4,999 didn't know that you only had enough for the first two, you just said, here, eat. That's faith. Here, eat. Because you're believing that what you have will be enough. That's faith that is working and living. But faith that is not working and that is dead is faith to say, listen, y'all going down there and get something to eat. And then you sit there and eat what you have. Y'all ain't hearing me. What they say, trust the process. Sometimes you just got to be willing to give to the multitude in order to receive from the masses. So this goes back to my initial assertion. When you have nothing left, God will increase. All we need to do is have faith in what we have left. We've been speaking about the authority of words. The one thing that Jesus says this. And therefore I say to you that whatever things you ask when you pray, believe that you receive them and you will have them. The key to our faith and the key to growing in our faith is to never consider that we have nothing left. There must be something we haven't seen or believed in that God can multiply in order to help us. Even a widow recognized a small jar of oil in her cupboard while she was worrying about losing her sons. When we focus more on what we're going to lose, we will eventually overlook the one thing that God can use to resolve our need. See, the disciples said that all they had was enough for 2, and yet that was enough to feed them all. Therefore, I want you to recognize today that your nothing has something in store for you. I want you to recognize today that your nothing has something in store for you. The verse says in verse 18, Christ said, bring them here to me. He's not speaking of people. He's not speaking of situations. He said, bring me them 5 loaves and bring me them 2 fish. Bring them to me. At the moment that the disciples considered that they had not enough or nothing to feed the people, Jesus does something to force them to see differently. He says to them, bring what you have left to me. Bring your nothing to me. Now, if you really think about it, Jesus could have corrected them. He could have chastised them for their unbelief. But instead, he instructed them to bring to him what they had left. And as we see in the passage, he took what they had left, their nothing, and multiplied it to the point that it fed an entire 5,000. And that was just the men. So when we think we have nothing left, we must turn off our faith. We must turn to our faith. We must trust that God will continue to be our source, our way maker, so that even when we think we have nothing, God has something. All we need to do is bring what we have to God and let him decide what to do with it. You see, when we begin to overthink God by telling him that we have nothing, we are trying to deceive God. The only reason we believe we have nothing is because we haven't recognized the value and what we have. Y'all missed that. See, our abilities, our giftings, our talents, all can be used for the glory of God if we could simply submit all things to God and allow him to determine what to do with it next. Of all the things Jesus could have done, he says, bring them here to me. How many times have you brought everything to God and not seen a resolution? How many times have you brought everything to God? In fact, how many times have you ever brought anything to God and God did not respond? See, the thing that I learned about it is this. When you bring something to God, God makes something out of it. You bring God a lemon, he does make lemonade. You bring God a jar of oil, he'll fill your house. But when the only time you don't see anything happening is because you actually bring God nothing. You don't believe that anything that you have is worth value, so you don't bring him anything. Therefore, he doesn't have anything to work with or to bring multiplicity to or to bring increase to, because you're not bringing him anything, but you're asking him for everything. God, enlarge my territory. Well, bring me a small piece of land. Well, I don't have that. What are you standing on? God, I need you to increase my finances. Well, bring him something. Well, I don't have a job, so I can't put anything in. But did you not just get some kind of change? Didn't you just pick up $1 off the street? Didn't somebody just give you something? Give it to God. Give him something to multiply. Yeah. Go in your corner, go in your closet, get that jar of coins. You go to Coinstar before you go to God. But you want him to multiply it. Give him something to increase. Lord God, strengthen my family. But you don't only want to show up for church. You the only one that comes to church. You the only one that prays, and you don't even pray. You just go to church. But you want God to increase your family. God, protect my home. But you don't pray for... Jesus. You don't pray for your own house. You don't cover it. You don't walk around it and say, this is the house of God. You don't do anything to protect it just a little bit. Do you not realize when you ask God to heal a wound, he wants you to bring the Band-Aid. Y'all ain't hearing it. Y'all not hearing me. He says, if you bring the Band-Aid, you letting me know that you want it healed. See, our greatest hindrance is the ability to restrict what we bring to God. We limit our supplications because we are so afraid of losing everything. Therefore, we only surrender what we think is enough to be defined as having nothing left. Wow. But anyone with a little bit of something will keep something for themselves. I'm certain the disciples were not trying to keep anything to themselves here. But if they were, I can imagine them thinking, hey, I can't give you my meal. I'm not, so it's not my fault that the 5,000 didn't come here with no food. I didn't tell them to follow you. But at the end of the day, that little lunchbox felt the world. And how do we know? So not once do we trust God enough to make sure that we are taken care of once we have taken care of others. If you read the passage, it says that so they all ate and were filled, and they took up 12 baskets full of the fragments that remained. Mm-hmm. This is where faith works. He took a lunchbox and not only fed 5,000, but they had 12 baskets left. Mm-hmm. What started as food enough for 2 became enough for 5,000 plus 12 baskets. And if you understand it from the basic on the number of disciples, which is 12, he had created, not only fed enough for 5,000 people, but he also blessed each disciple that served by giving them a basket full of food. It says, and it fed 5,000, not including women and children, and 12 baskets were left over. This is the miracle in the lesson. There were 12 disciples with food enough for 2. They take the food enough for 2 and feed 5,000. Once the 5,000 was fed, there were 12 baskets left, meaning if there were anyone else hungry or even wanting more, they could still come and eat. But there was no need for this because the scripture says that they all ate and were filled. Mm-hmm. So when God had finished filling others, he will fill you. Wow. You must be willing to give him everything. This is why I stand on the belief that we are never without something, because nothing is still something. By definition, nothing means not anything, which means you have had to have had something at some point in order to measure out what nothing really is. Only time you've had nothing is because you've never experienced that something. Mm-hmm. So if you've experienced that something, then you still have the knowledge of what it is. So to say I have nothing means you don't have anything. And if you look around and say, I don't have anything, but yet you're walking into your house or you're getting into your car and you're driving away, you still have something. Oh, I'm just... That's why we need to realize, people like points, here we go again. This is what you realize, that when you think you have nothing left, God will take what you stopped with and multiply it. Matter of fact, let me say it this way. Wherever you stopped with your nothing, God will carry on with something. See, here's the thing. We stop our progress at the moment that we feel like we don't have anything left to go on. Look at verse 20. It says, so they all ate and were filled, and they took up 12 baskets full of the fragments that remained. Mm-hmm. Now, those who had eaten were about 5,000 men, besides women and children. But the definition says something. We see it says that it ate and they all filled, and everyone was fed, and there was 12 baskets of fragments left. So when we think about nothing, definition says having no prospect or progress or of no value. It says having no prospect of progress or of no value. So when we think about nothing, nothing not only means not anything, not having anything, but it also means that you don't believe you can progress. Not only that you don't think you can progress, but you don't have any value. See, now I'm walking somebody's wheelhouse. The reason why you walking around saying I don't have anything or I have nothing left is because someone devalued you and you listened. Somewhere along the line, you realize that you can't progress further without someone else, without realizing that they're the reason why you're not progressing. Because what happens is you're trying to take something wrong into nothing that's right. You're trying to, God has revealed to you what is wrong, but you're trying to drag what is wrong into an existence that you've yet to see because you've never experienced that existence, because that existence will actually give you a value that there's something that you're carrying with you has never given you. Watch this, watch this. Any car dealership or aficionado will tell you it makes absolutely no sense for you to buy a high-end car, Mercedes, Jaguar, or Range Rover, something like that, and put rims on it. Because once you put rims on it, you have devalued the car. But because it looks like it's more expensive with the rims, you put them on there. But what happens is it changes the way it drives, it changes the warranty, and now if something happens because of the rims, you can't get it fixed properly. So they say if you take with the value of what you have and keep it that way, the value goes up. What we do is we see rims and we keep trying to take the rims with us because we don't want people to deal with the image of us being alone. We don't want people to have to question us as to why things didn't work out the way they should or why things didn't function the way they were. We don't want people to keep asking us what happened. So what we do is we would rather devalue ourselves and stop our progress by bringing something into nothing that will destroy the nothing that we already have. Nothing means no progression, no value, but it also means having not anything. But what you're doing is you're stopping the ability of knowing what's in the nothing by bringing in something that's been stopping you from knowing what's in the nothing in the first place. So do you think that the door to your next will ever open if you keep standing at the door with the enemy with you? The people on the inside keeps looking out the mirror and they see you standing there and they want to let you in, but they also realize that you have attached yourself to an enemy that will contaminate what's inside, and you're wondering why you can't go any further than where you are, because it's not that you don't have anything left. You won't let go so you can have nothing to walk with. See, it's not that you don't have nothing because you haven't reached nothing, because you haven't surrendered what you need to surrender to be in a place of saying, God, I have nothing left. He says, I know, come in. So you're standing at the doorway and getting no access because you won't let go of what's preventing you access. Oh my gosh. I think about armored trucks, armored cars. I was happening in the store one day, and the person came in he got out of the armored car, out of the back of it, and he walked straight forward to the office. He didn't turn, flinch, or do anything. He held close to that bag, and that gun was right into his side. And he went in. We didn't see him, and he came out. He walked right straight, didn't speak to anybody. Went right in the truck and left. The thing that I found about it was such a mindset that he would not allow anything around him to hinder what he was going, because he was carrying something of value. But the thing that I thought about is, what if somebody tried to rob him? They could put a gun to his head and bring him all the way to the truck, and the people on the inside still would not open the door to let him in. Because what was inside, watch this, was more valuable than the values that he carried. So even though he had a level of value, it was not as more valuable than what was inside, but yet he was willing to give up his life for what was inside, not what he was carrying.
Wow. Amen.
We stop our progress because we rather live with the value on the outside than the value that's being stored up for us. We'd rather be on the outside in a place of contamination instead of moving into a place of increase and healing, because we would rather take the value that's being devalued every day instead of moving into a place where our value increases. So when you have nothing left, you have to find your value. And the value is going beyond where you are. And the only way you can is you have to remove what is stopping your progress. That's why Paul says when you run the race, you must lay aside the weight. You have to lay aside those things that are stopping you from progressing. When you find yourself non-progressing, it's because you've reached the place of nothing. And the reason you've reached the place of nothing is because you don't see any progress ahead of you, because you now feel no value. There's nothing worse than finding yourself in a place of knowing your value, but then reconnecting into a situation that tells you have no value.
See it often.
You work hard to get your credit score to a certain point, and it meant cutting folks off, but then you reconnect with folks and your credit went in the trash can again, and you're trying to figure out what just happened. What happened is you brought back what destroyed you in the first place. You brought back what destroyed, because it's a psychological attack. It is a mentality. Christ was trying to teach the disciples that you need to stop storing up the little things, give up the little, and watch what happens. They came in there with a chicken box, literally, and came out with 12 baskets full of food. But had they held fast to what they had, then they would have been walking around trying to break this chicken box amongst 12 people, and then feeling guilty because 5,000 looking at them hungry. And that's what we do, because we don't realize. It's like, first of all, you can't feed the masses with where you are. You got to feed them with where you're going. And if you're sitting there saying, okay, I don't have anything, I have nothing, it's because you no longer value your ability to do more. And this is how we know that this is key. Because it says, and after all were full, there was 12 baskets of fragments left. I need you to realize that when you give God your nothing, he will move you to a place and transition you into such a greater position that he will return to you a basket full of fragments of who you were, just so you can see how much you had to get rid of in order for you to reach that place. The fragments are a reminder of the brokenness that you had to go through. The fragments are things that you can still keep in a basket but can never reattach, because what they were connected to is no longer existing. That's why they're fragments. Oh my gosh. So if you gave him nothing, when you have nothing, he gives you back fragments. But the fragments is just a reflection. That's it. I thank God for the basket of fragments, because I can pick through them and say, yeah, I remember that and remember that. But I can't put them back together. I can't attach them. Humpty Dumpty, what'd he do? Sat on the wall. Humpty Dumpty, what'd he do? Had a great fall. It says all the horses and all the men could not put Humpty Dumpty back together again. Why? Because no matter what, they could put the big pieces together, but it was the fragments that kept them tight. So when you find yourself holding a basket of fragments, these are ones that don't fit. So you're standing on the other side of the door. Your value has increased. Your mindset is clear. You are moving in progression, but you're carrying a basket, and you're looking in the basket and you see names of people that you had to release because they were attached to you and stopping you from growing. You see situations that you walked away from that people said that you shouldn't have, and you'll regret it, but you see them in the basket, because if they had real value, they would never be in the basket. There's no regrets in the basket. There's just redemption in the basket. There's no suffering in the basket. There's only thank you, Lord, that I didn't die in those situations basket. There's healing in the basket, because it's removing the fragments from you so that you can see clear and your value is clear. I was reminded this morning about when the process of something being made into a diamond, that when it's taken out of the land, out of the mine, out of the cave, it's still stone. And they have to chip away the stone in order to get to the gem. And the gem still is not all of that great value. And they chip away and chip away and chip away and chip away until there's clarity there. And the more clear that it is, the higher the value. But what they do is they take the fragments from that and use it in other applications. So what happens is when God chips away at you, your value is increased, and everything that he took away from you is still being used for his kingdom. You're just not in the process of using it. But it had to be chipped away from you. Don't think people are going to suffer because they're not with you. Think about how much you're suffering because you're with them.
Yes.
Don't think about how much the job can't function without you. Think about the increase you would get if you was no longer at that job. When you think about it in the proper value of saying you're more valuable than what you think you are, it doesn't mean arrogance or cockiness. It just belief that by faith, that if you work your faith and move where he tells you to move, you'll continue your progression. We stop our progression simply because we feel like we have nothing left. And that's when we give in and give up. Not to God, but to the enemy. We go back to situations with our tail between our legs and beg for stuff to work out when nothing has changed. We still holding on to our 5 loaves and 2 fish when God said, bring them to me. See, that's the key you have to realize to all of this. God says, bring it to me. He says, bring them to me. Bring it to me. Until you bring it to, you will never resolve the situation on your own. The disciples' resolution was send the people away to the store. Christ said, feed them here. They said, we can't feed them here. We don't have what it takes to feed them here. He says, that's because you haven't brought to me what you have. So if you bring to me what you have, I will show you how to feed the people so that they're so full, watch this, that when they leave, they won't return. Sometimes you got to pray people away.
Hallelujah. Well,
I ain't gonna lie. Sometimes you got to pray folks away. Pray them out. You stand on your faith and you become so full, so progressive, so valuable to God that they can't handle it, that they have to say, I can't do this no more, and move around. You got to live in that life where you're so valuable to God that wherever you go, people see value in you and try to offer you positions that you're not even qualified for, simply because you have something on the table. But it comes from moving from the fragments. Because watch this. You didn't have the fragments when you began. You had the fragments when you was finished. Because you didn't know what God was going to break away from you until you brought to him all that you had left, was you, which was simply a meal. So you bring God your portion, and he'll give you back a basket. And when he gives you back a basket, it'll be everything that is remindful of you for you to live authentically. That's why I say to you today as I close out, when you have nothing left, God is going to give you more. If I can give God what I have left, God will supply all my needs. All I need to do is give him what I have left. And here's the thing. I may not have much, but what I have, I know God will increase. And I thank him for the fragments that get me where I got to go. Everybody standing on your feet.